Hi guys. So I'm trying AirPods for the first time. When my hair is like this, that's all I can hear is my hair. So I'm going to wait here until somebody joins me so we can check and see if this audio is up to snuff. So I'm using these because they have noise canceling. And I had somebody very distraught sounding. Oh, what's up, Craig? Tell me about the sound. And Allie said it sounds good when it's live, but the replay has a buzz. So tell me, can you hear me? And how does it sound? And can you hear my hair? Can you hear the jiggle jiggle of my hair? Super well. Could you hear what I was? Oh, it doesn't do it then. You can hear the hair. No buzz, but you can hear the hair. So we're going to do this today. All right. Let's see how the replay does later. And we have a long chapter today, but I resolve to do it tonight. I may lose some of you to the sleep, which is okay. But I think I'm going to just tackle this one chapter at a time. We'll see how it goes. I know some of them. Let me see where chapter 4 is quick. Oh, that's a long one. Chapter 5. Actually, that's 2 of them. I missed it somewhere in there. Cool. I think we will. That's good. I know it's the, gosh, these are Justin, so he's got big ear holes, I guess, because there's some pressure in there. Like, I have resisted the AirPod thing. Oh, I wonder if I touch it, if it'll end up pausing things. Fancy little case. It connected automatically too. I'm like, that's creepy. The owner of these AirPods will know where you are. I'm like, okay. Hi, Mary. Hi, guys. I'm glad to see y'all. I had 2,000 freaking views last night. It's like, what? That's okay. So the night before I got 1,000. And when I signed off on this, I was stunned and my jaw dropped. And I was a little bit like hindsight embarrassed and shy. And I'm like, oh my God. And then last night it doubled. I was like, what? Anyway, all right. I wonder if there's a lag. It feels like a little. Anyway, so chapter 2. An aura of danger. For those of you who don't know, thank you, sweet lady. All right. Sorry. And I said my Zen yesterday. I have a split Zen and Alps in here, and the Zen are still in there because I prefer my Alps. I didn't. I haven't done anything different. I love that that's happening too, and a lot of people are like sticking around to watch us read together. That's my favorite part, especially because people are like, there's so many people bringing up the similarities between Charlie and JFK. And I'm like, that's important for us to do right now together, collectively. So, and looking at these two different angles back to back from the Devil's Notebook or the Devil's Notebook chessboard to this bad boy, because Operation Chaos, they wanted chaos. I wonder about YouTube. Sometimes it tells me I have 0, and there's plenty of people watching. You did? What, Charlie shot? No, I don't believe he was shot, darling. I think I 100%. believe with my whole heart that it was that Rode microphone, just like them Lebanon pagers. So, well, I mean, yes, tell me more. If you want to put it in the chat, I will come back for that. What did Charlie say? Was it like, or were you watching? Or was it just like an understanding? Or did you interact with him or JFK? Yeah, so we'll go through this together. And it's going to be a long one, so hunker down. And if you, what, write a book? He's telling you what you were told to write a book? Oh, Mike? Yes. Shape charge. That's right. Hello, Professor Hoodoo. Welcome back. I love that Candace was like, for those of you who don't know, a shape charge operates like this. That was the first time. So I remember it, like, just in passing, it being thrown around, shape charge. Like to blow a safe in a movie or something. I don't know what it actually. Anyway, yeah. What do you? Oh, I think that, yeah. I think there was a whole lot. They wanted to cover all bases. See, and people are saying there was something about that necklace. I think the consensus has grown towards it being a microphone, but I think they needed a larger casing for something to explode. Somebody left the sliding glass door just crack open, and we were wondering why were all these mosquitoes in the house. Anyway, all right, should we dive in? Not electrocution, not enough room to text. Yeah, the necklace should have residue on it. No, it was definitely, though, a godsend as far as catching people's attention. Like, why would his necklace fly up, a necklace that hangs here, fly up behind him if he got shot in the neck, you know? And they were trying to say it was a 30-06. That was my first, like, are you kidding me? Like, and how are there so many people just going, okay? I don't know. It's just crazy town. The ritual intent item. Pavers were a cheap, no permitted work to, yeah. Hi, Defining Rod. I'm glad to see all of you here. Wonderful. All right. Mm-hmm. Or a day later. It's wild. Erica hanging out of the car, dude. Anyway. All right. And we begin. 8 minutes in. Yeah, but the hole it leaves. And it was a soft tip bullet. So, and that's designed to make it a much larger wound. It was square. It was and then the black thing that whatever blew the piece of shrapnel. John Bray said it was like the back of the battery housing or something. I don't remember what he said. I always comment www.followtheepicenter.com when people say that he was shot and or that he's still alive. That's my go-to, like watch, look, delve into this if you're interested. You see this mosquito is flying in my face. Okay, if I see him again, he's done for. All right. Oh, I saw him. Nope. All right. Okay. Let's just dive in. Chapter 2, An Aura of Danger. Yeah, and knowing now that the video footage showed, he said the kid thing just didn't sit right. I need to read comments that I respond to out loud because I've noticed in replays that I'm just talking like I didn't say that. Johnny, you sent a gift? Thank you. What was that? A W? Oh my gosh. Are you so love the name, Johnny Cash. I'm a fan. What's a W? Like a win? You send me a win. That's very kind. Thank you. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I was mentioning Ed Gein yesterday, and somebody brought up Dahmer, and I was like, they're both from Wisconsin, but I didn't say who the other one was, so I resolved to do that better as well. Thank you for that W, friend, Johnny Cash. All right, we're getting into math in the comments now. All right, so live freaky, die freaky. When I started interviews for my premiere piece in April of 1999, much of what you've just read was unknown to me. I had gotten through Helter Skelter and I knew the murders had left a mark on Hollywood, but that was about all. In a few years, I developed a deep obsession with the case. I'd have the trial transcripts at my fingertips and binders full of press clippings at my disposal, but in the beginning, I was flummoxed. I don't know where the accent is on that word, but I think he uses that a few times in this book. Flummoxed. Anyway, Helter Skelter had captured the story definitively. Its author had ensured that Manson was locked away. How could a magazine feature top that? Leslie, my editor, had given me leeway in finding an angle, but her first suggestion, how did the crimes change Hollywood, wasn't enough for me, and I suspected it wouldn't be enough for her either. Flummoxed. Thank you. Silence and violence. That's the kind of support I need. Flummoxed. Flummoxed. Cole, welcome. Silence. What's your name? Although silence is super cool. So flummoxed. Okay. Flummoxed. Flummoxed. Anyway, moving on. We learned together. Thank you for, you know, participating. So Helter Skelter had captured the story definitively. Its author had ensured that Manson was locked away. How could a magazine? Oh yeah, it wouldn't be enough for her either. Right. My earliest weeks of interviews pulled me in wildly different directions. At first, I was compelled by the way the murders had sundered friendships in Hollywood, revealing strong opinions about the era's mortality or morality or lack thereof. As I cycled through Hollywood cliques, I found that I was reigniting 30-year-old rumors and rivalries. Everyone over time, I almost got it. It's landing on my book. Dude, go away. Find somebody else. It's tiny little insect. I was dealing in memories that had survived decades of erosion. Even my most reliable sources were shaky on the details. Did I skip something? Everyone over time assigned the blame for the crimes a little differently. I skipped that, I guess. Even my most reliable sources were shaky on the details. As for the unreliable sources, I kept reminding myself that many of them were washed up Hollywood personalities, often in their dotage. Their memories had warped to accommodate their bruised egos, their ulterior motives, and above all, their sense that they were at the center of any story worth telling. A lot of the contradictions I heard centered on the house at CeeLo Drive and the decadent scene there in the months before the murders. That house still signified a lot in Hollywood. For some, the death of Sharon Tate and her friends aroused as much fear as it did grief. After the murders, the media had blamed Hollywood's unreality and hedonism, as the New York Times' Roberts put it. Come on! It's the tiniest little fly. I just saw it. It's a babe. And I'm having this itchy situation on my sleeve, so we're rolling it up. After the murders, the media blamed Hollywood's unreality and hedonism, as the New York Times' Stephen Rogers put it, for having fostered an atmosphere where mass homicide was all but guaranteed. Roberts, then Los Angeles bureau chief of the Times, talked to a lot of Hollywood people in those first weeks. I'll catch my stride. You trust. Oh, I like it. That's okay. I was a para for special ed. Um, and it takes a certain kind of person. And I commend you and hope that you have a profoundly positive effect on all that you encounter, teachers included. So, anyway, that's amazing. It does feel it. Yeah, it does feel. I don't know. And then, so as a para, I was pushed into a teaching position. I talk about this in other videos and stuff, but I love that it's coming up right now. Yeah. Anyway, so and there I did it again. I had this interaction with the chat and I didn't read what I was reacting to. Sorry, guys. You're leading me wrong. If I had to try to put a last time, or if I had to try a last time, I'd say flummoxed and try not to put emphasis on either syllable if possible. Flummoxed. Oh, flummoxed. That feels better. It just looks so intense being such a long, oop, there it is, flummoxed. It feels like if there's two M's there, there's got to be flummoxed type of a mixed. Flummoxed. Awesome. I'm so stoked. Thank you. Flummoxed. Flummoxed. Yes. Excellent. Thank you. See, you guys help me get better. And I have dyslexia. So if you haven't been here, this is what you're in for. All right. So, for having fostered an atmosphere where mass homicide was all but guaranteed, Roberts, then Los Angeles bureau chief of the Times, talked to a lot of Hollywood people in those first weeks. Bugliosi, Bugliosi, I like saying it with the G sound harder. Anyway, quoted him in Helter Skelter. All the stories had a common thread that somehow the victims had brought the murders on themselves. The attitude was summed up in the epigram live freaky, die freaky. The problem was, 30 years later, no one could agree on who had brought the freakiness into the home and why. I had wondered if there was a conspiracy of silence in Hollywood. It had taken months for the LAPD to crack the case. In that time, Manson and the family had almost certainly killed others. If Hollywood hadn't circled the wagons, it seemed there was a good chance the investigation could have ended sooner. Oh, thank you. Awesome. I'm glad that you joined. Um, and thank you for being so kind. All right. No one could agree on who brought the freakiness, right? It had taken months for the LAPD to crack the case, and in that time, they could have killed more. Hi, Abigail. So many of the people I spoke to had strong ideas about why these murders had happened, and yet none of them had spoken to the police, and many remained unwilling to go on the record with me. The one thing everyone seemed to agree on, everyone outside of the DA's office, that is that Bugliosi's helter-skelter motive didn't add up. It had worn thin with police and Hollywood insiders, and it was wearing thin with me, too. I tried to unpack this idea that Manson chose the CeeLo house to instill fear in Terry Melcher, the record producer whose rejection had apparently so enraged Manson that he activated a race war. One problem was that Melcher, by all accounts, had no idea that this was why the family attacked his former home. They never told him that they wanted him to feel afraid, and they didn't follow the murders with any kind of communications to him. According to Bugliosi, Melcher never realized the crimes had anything to do with him until months later, when the police got in touch with him. How was this motive supposed to work if Melcher was never apprised of it? The grander scheme underlying Helter Skelter to start a massive race war by making it look as if Black Panthers were behind the murders didn't land either. Although Manson was clearly a racist, and while he had a wild eschatological philosophy, no one believed even for a second that black militants were behind the killings, as he'd hoped it would seem. So was the family just too dumb or too drugged to pull it off? Or was there another reason for the murders that had nothing to do with race wars and scaring Melcher? It seemed to me that the Manson murders had garnered much of their infamy, and Bugliosi much of his fame, from the Helter Skelter motive. A hippie race war spawned by an acid-drenched, brainwashing ex-con. It was such a fantastical conceit that the murders lived on in pop culture. With a more commonplace explanation, a drug burn, say, or Hollywood infighting, they would have faded into history after a few years, and Bugliosi would never have written the most popular true crime book of all time. With an eye on other possible motives, I focused on three questions in my first weeks of reporting. First, did the victims at the Tate house have something to do with the killers? Second, had Terry Melcher known who the killers were immediately after the crime and failed to report them to authorities? Third, and most sensationally, were the police aware of Manson's role in the crimes much earlier than it seemed? Had they delayed arresting the family to protect the victims, or Melcher and his circle from scrutiny? Here, as neatly as I can tell it, is what I learned in the early, frantic weeks of my reporting. Just as important is what I didn't learn, which goes a long way towards explaining how a simple 3-month magazine assignment turned into a 20-year obsession. The dancing was different. All right, Julian Wasser, a photographer for Life magazine, was my first interview. Almost right away, I felt the kind of cognitive dissonance that followed me through my reporting. I'd meet my sources at a fancy restaurant of their choice, in this case, Le Petit Four, a sunny sidewalk cafe in West Hollywood, and within minutes, as the conversation turned towards violence, the plush setting would feel totally incongruous. Dang it, such was the case with Wasser. Let me take a second. Now we'll drink. All right. All right. Where the heck was I? Oh, Le Petit Four, a sunny sidewalk cafe in West Hollywood. And within minutes, conversation turned towards violence. It was incongruous. Such was the case with Wasser, who told me over a tuna, I don't know what that is, salad, about one of the saddest days of his life. Look at this word. What does that say? NIC with a weird symbol on the bottom. OI, NICOISE. I don't even know where to start. So, days after the murder, as part of an editorial for Life, Wasser had accompanied Roman Polanski on his first return visit to the house on CeeLo Drive. I remember, let me get the picture. It's the second picture, second page of pictures, maybe. There it is. That's his wife's blood on the door. So, Roman Polanski. Oh, down here, dancing was different. There it is. On his first return visit to the house on CeeLo Drive. One of Wasser's pictures from that day is a study in grief. Polanski in a white t-shirt sits slumped and devastated on the front porch of his home, his eyes carefully averted from the faded word pig written in his wife's blood on the front door. Yeah. It was too soon, Wasser told him, or told me. He'd shadowed Polanski as he moved through the blood-stained rooms. It wasn't a home anymore. It was evidence. There were fingerprinting dust powder. There was, all over the bedroom and the phones, and there was blood in the carpet. It was thick like jello, and there was so much of it that it hadn't even dried yet, Wasser said. You could still smell it, salty, carnal. The odor reminded him of a slaughterhouse. Right away, Wasser regretted the assignment, but Polanski wanted him there, even at his most vulnerable moment. It wasn't an exercise in vanity, or at least not entirely. Hoping to help solve the murders, Polanski had invited along a psychic, Peter Herkos, whose alleged clairvoyance made him a minor celebrity. Wasser was enlisted to provide duplicates of his photos to Herkos, who would glean psychic vibrations from them. Polanski led them to the nursery, which Tate had carefully furnished and decorated in anticipation of the baby. Roman went over to the bassinet and just started crying. I said, "This is such a private moment. I shouldn't be here." And he said, "Please don't take any more pictures right now." It was just the saddest thing I've ever seen in my whole career. I've never seen anything in my mind so intrusive, even though he had invited me. The enormity of it, Wasser added. Going into this pregnant woman's bedroom and seeing her intimate area covered with fingerprint powder and realizing what had happened there. Herkos, it turned out, didn't share Wasser's sense of solemnity. A week before the Life Story ran, pirated reproductions of Wasser's photos appeared on the front page of the tabloid The Hollywood Citizen News. The psychic had sold his copies, vibrations and all. Wasser described the great fear that descended on Los Angeles after the murders. I lived in Beverly Hills. If you went to someone's house, they wouldn't let you in. The normal selfishness and paranoia was magnified a hundredfold. It was another reason for the answer or for not answering your door. I heard a lot of that in my first interviews. Sales of burglar alarms and security systems had apparently soared after the murders, and people were quick to ditch their drug stashes. There's a famous anonymous line from Life, from the very article featuring Wasser's pictures. Anyway, actually, toilets are flushing all over Beverly Hills. The entire Los Angeles sewer system is stoned. Others took more drastic precautions. At the funeral of his friend Sebring, Steve McQueen carried a pistol in his belt. His publicist, Warren Cowan, told me. The actor was in the throes of an anxiety that pervaded Hollywood, where everyone suspected that the killer might be among them. Dominic Dunn, the Vanity Fair journalist, known for his reporting in the entertainment industry, told me Hollywood did change. The dancing was different. The drugs were different. The fucking was different. He and his wife were so frightened that they sent their kids to stay with their grandmother in Northern California. Tina Sinatra, Frank's daughter, said that her father had hired a security guard. He was there from sundown to sunrise for months, she explained. Mom fed him to death, I think. He was uniformed with a gun and sat in the kitchen all night. I can remember the whole tone of the city afterwards. It defined fear. In 1999, apparently that fear was still alive and well, at least among Hollywood's A-list, many of whom declined to speak to me, even though 30 years had passed. I was rebuffed in the intimates of Tate, Polanski, and Sebring, sometimes with vehemence, sometimes with tersely worded emails or phone calls. No interest. Does not want to be involved. Or just the one word, no. Warren Beatty and Jane Fonda said no. Jack Nicholson and Dennis Hooper, both reputedly close to Tate and Polanski, no, no. Candice Bergen, Terry Melcher's girlfriend at the time of the murders, said no too, as did David Geffen, Mia Farrow, and Angelica Houston, among others. As the rejections piled up, I had my own bout of paranoia. Had some memo gone out? My request had simply asked if they'd like to discuss the after effects of the murders on their community. It didn't feel like I was prying. And Premiere, since it was dedicated entirely to the movie business, usually garnered some enthusiasm from this crowd. Bruce Dern, no. Kirk Douglas, no. Paul Newman, no. Elliot Gould, Anne Margaret, Hugh Hefner, no, no, no. All told, more than 36 people turned me down. Some were household names, but plenty of the decidedly non-famous found reasons to decline too. It was looking like I'd have a story about Hollywood with no one from Hollywood in it. Hoping for something more revelatory, I went to less well-known names. Peter Bart, the longtime editor-in-chief of Vanity, had been close to Polanski. What he told me gave me some semblance of a lead. I must confess that crowd was a little scary, Bart said, referring to Polanski and Tate's circle. There was an aura of danger around them. There was an instinctive feeling that everyone was pushing it, and things were getting out of control. My wife and I still talk about it, he said. Anybody who underestimates the impact of the event is full of shit. This is my first taste of the live freaky, die freaky view. The idea that Polanski's circle, with its bacchanalian parties and flexible morals, had brought about their own murders. I thought there might be something here. After all, the murders had been solved and the victims had done seemingly nothing to instigate them. But Bart and others I'd soon speak to still claimed that their lifestyles were to blame. I had to get closer to those who'd known Sharon and Roman, anyone who'd attended these supposed lurid parties, but the rejections kept coming. I had been in touch with Diane Ladd's manager, having heard that Ladd, who'd been married to Bruce Dern at the time of the murders, ran in some of the circles as Tate and Polanski. Her manager promised to set up an interview. The next day she called back saying that Ladd had an emotional, visceral reaction. The manager said, I don't know what happened with Diane back in the 60s, but she adamantly refused to have anything to do with the piece. She even told me that if her name was in it, she was going to contact her attorney. Peter Fonda gave me yet another no. Not long afterward, I came across him at a gas station in the middle of the Mojave Desert of all places, some 5 hours outside L.A. True to form, he was in leathers and on a Harley. I approached him with my business card and tried to explain the story as succinctly as possible. He seemed receptive, but later when I followed up again, the answer was still no. I mentioned the rash of rejections to Peter Bart. His observation stayed with me, especially as the months wore on and I began to see that Manson might have been more plugged into Hollywood than anyone cared to admit. Just the fact that they're all saying no, he said, is fascinating. Yes. In a Sierra town? I grew up in Reno. That kind of Sierra? Bugliosi's first slip. There was one major player who agreed to talk to me. Oh, here it is again. Angelica Houston and Jack Nicholson were dating. A friend of mine took care of Angelica's horses in the Sierra town I lived in. I need to continue to do that. So there's a reference. So there was one major player who agreed to talk to me, Vincent Bugliosi. Not only did he sign on for an interview, he invited me to his new home in Pasadena, the same one where years later he would threaten to hurt me like I'd never been hurt before if I published my findings. There was no sign of that animosity during our first meeting. On a sunny spring day, Bugliosi gave me 6 hours of his time, driving me around to show me various landmarks related to the crime and enjoying a long lunch with me in one of his favorite restaurants. I was flattered to have captured his attention. Here was the man who'd put away one of the monsters of the 20th century. Later, I would question the motive behind all his generosity. A prosecutor makes a lot of enemies over the course of his career, and Bugliosi, I'd learn, made more than most, both in and out of the DA's office. But considering that he had once fielded death threats from Manson himself, he lived in a surprisingly unprotected home, quintessentially suburban. He and Gail, his wife of 43 years, were still moving in when I visited that April of 99. Sorry. Bugliosi, white-haired, lean, and blue-eyed, greeted me with a firm handshake, not a hamshake. Gross. A hamshake. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a litany of apologies for the unpacked boxes. In the living room, flowers of all kinds, dried, artificial, and real, burst from pots and vases. Their kitchen, adorned with Gale's chicken and rooster tchotchkes, could have been right out of a 50s sitcom. Tchotchkes are spelled Tchotchkes. I never seen that word. Well, I guess last time I read it, maybe I just grazed over it. So, or just reading it out loud made it sink in what the word sounded like anyway. So Bugliosi picked up a hairless cat, then brushed against his leg. A rare Siamese breed, he told me. The cat's name was Sherlock because he snoops everywhere. Gale put out a plate of cookies and a pair of iced teas for us. Keep in mind, Beverly Hills, Bel Air are vastly different. Bel Air is a gated neighborhood, and there's parts of Beverly Hills that finger their way up into the hills, so people would have the 90210 opposite side of Reno. What, Sparks? Or like California? Or were you telling me? Anyway, 90201. And I read that as 90210. Anyway, all right, here we go. Sequoia. That's what I was thinking of too. Actually, there was a bartender I used to work with. His name was Chachi, and he was real handsy with women and really got himself in a lot of trouble because of that propensity. I hated him for it. Ham shakes. Abby said, I'm still thinking about ham shakes. All right, let's go. Let's go. Bugliosi was a fast talker. He sent a tsunami of words in my direction, sometimes jumping out of his chair for no apparent reason. Gale, an island of repose and by comparison, busied herself at the kitchen counter. I caught her rolling her eyes as her husband told me that the movie version of Helter Skelter from 1976 was #1 that year and had the biggest ratings on TV history prior to Roots. He had essentially been on a 30-year victory lap, and he had his talking points down cold. It was hard to get him off script. As he drove me around that day, he was still reliving his encounters with Manson in the courtroom. Sometimes it seemed he was quoting almost verbatim from Helter Skelter. On the surface, he seemed chatty and forthcoming, but everything he said for hours was canned. Still hoping for a good angle, I tried to probe, however gently, at the holes I'd noticed in Helter Skelter. For one, how had the cops missed so many clues in the case? Why hadn't they solved it much sooner? As he did in his book, Bugliosi blamed sloppy police work. They never would have cracked the case without him, he told me. I wanted to take on the Silo House's caretaker, William Garrettson, who'd been the only one on the property to survive that night. Garrettson lived in the modest guest house separated from the main house. His story was so unlikely that at first he'd been in the LAPD's #1 suspect. He had been. He swore that his stereo had been playing loud enough to drown out the murders. He had heard no part of the brutal slaughter, even though the screaming and the gunshots had occurred only 60 feet from his bedroom window, and Bugliosi concurred, albeit reluctantly. The police, he reminded me, had conducted sound tests that supported Garrison. I moved on to Terry Melcher. If Manson had wanted to teach him a lesson, why did he order the killings of people who had no real connection to him, other than that they lived at the same address at different times? Melcher didn't know any of the victims at the Tate house. I couldn't even find evidence that he'd met any of them. Plus, by Bugliosi's own account, Manson sent his followers to the Silo Drive house knowing full well that Melcher didn't live there anymore. Bugliosi dodged those questions, instead reiterating the terror that Melcher felt during the trial and for years afterwards, fearing that Manson or someone from the family still wanted him dead. Could he put me in touch with Melcher? The mere fact that I'd asked seemed to unnerve him a bit. He said I'd have a hard time getting him to talk. Later, when I did manage to track down Melcher, I'd find out why. As the sun was setting after many hours of talk, I asked Bugliosi if he could share anything with me about the case that he'd never, or that had never been reported before. The journalist's Hail Mary. I could see by the furrow in his brow that he was really thinking about it. I pulled a book from my bag. Barney Hoskins' Waiting for the Sun, A History of LA's Music Industry. I'd been reading it for research. What with all the rejections I'd gotten, I had a little more free time on my hands than I expected, and I wanted Bugliosi to look at a passage I had highlighted. Hoskins alleged that a few S&M movies had been filmed at the Tate House, and that a drug dealer had once been tied up and flogged against his will at a party there. Other sources, incense choking me out. Ed Sanders. Oh, other sources, including Ed Sanders' 1971 book, The Family, had made the same claims. But Bugliosi had conspicuously omitted the anecdote from Helter Skelter. Bugliosi seemed to be in the midst of some kind of internal debate. After what felt like a long silence, he told me to turn off my recorder. This can never be attributed to me, he began. Just say it's from a very reliable source. I'll explain later in my book why I'm treating this as an on-the-record response. When he joined the case, the detective told Bugliosi they'd recovered some videotape in the loft of the house on Silo Drive. According to detectives, the footage, clearly filmed by Polanski, depicted Sharon Tate being forced to have sex with two men. Bugliosi never saw the tape, but he told the detectives, "Put it back where you found it. Roman has suffered enough. There's nothing to gain. All it's going to do is hurt her memory and hurt him. They're both victims." Ooh, somebody asking? Oh, at Nat? Who's Nat? Nat Turner. Aw, sweet. Sweet comment. You did? How cool. Oh, as an early teenager, we'd play at the Spawn Ranch Mountains. Good to see you, Nat Turner. So, mm, oh yeah, it was a tawdry aside. It was a tawdry aside, I thought. And anyway, Bugliosi had reported most of this episode before him, or before. In Helter Skelter, he wrote that the cops had recovered a tape of Roman and Sharon making love, and that it had been discreetly returned to their home. Polanski had found it not long after, on the same visit with Julian Wasser and the psychic. He climbed the ladder to the loft. Bugliosi writes, found the videotape. LAPD had returned and slipped it into his pocket, according to one of the officers who was present. The more I thought about it, the more startled I was that the footage was so sordid. It gave yet more weight to the live freaky, die freaky motto. And soon after, it occurred to me, if Polanski had coerced Sharon into sleeping with two men and filmed it, wasn't that spousal abuse? Roman's a sicko, Bugliosi had said. He was making her do it. Was it rape? If Bugliosi was telling the truth, and that was a big if, I soon acknowledged, the tape seemed like something that could have raised Polanski's profile as a suspect, and something, therefore, that the police should have retained as evidence. I hoped that I could verify. Wow, I've never had it like back up on me like this. Hang on a sec. Chill out. It's that fake Nag Champa. If it was real, I'd be fine. Huh. Aquaman is silly. Yeah, bro. Anything Amber Heard touches gets silly. Laurel Canyon. So, okay, Dave McGowan works are a must for the tea on the fake hippie movement out of Laurel Canyon. All right, it was nope, 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 nope. All right, yes. I hoped that I could verify Bugliosi's story. It was the first piece of new information I had found so far. In my haste to keep reporting, I failed to see that the revelation came with a slip up on his part, one that would take me more than 6 years to recognize. He couldn't have told the detectives to put the tape back in the loft. As a DA, he wasn't assigned the Tate murder case until November 18th, 1969, months after Polanski's August 17th return visit to the house. In the early phase of the case, police need to talk to DAs like Bugliosi to authorize search warrants. If he'd learned about the tape from the detectives back in August, if he'd been the one, as he claimed, who ordered its return to the house, then something in the police investigation had necessitated his involvement much earlier than he'd ever acknowledged. Maybe it was something trifling. Maybe it was something he felt he had to cover up to protect some celebrity's reputation. The point was, we'd never know because it was something he'd hidden from his readers. Excuse me. Though I hadn't caught this mistake, there were more variations to come. When I finally found them, it would change the whole tenor of our relationship. Ugliness and purity. Helter Skelter opens with a famous sentence. It was so quiet, one of the killers would later say, you could almost hear the sound of ice rattling in cocktail shakers in the homes down the canyon. The first half of the book concerning the police investigation traffics in the dregs of that sentence. Given Bugliosi's revelation to me, it was the first place I'd started looking for a break. If he had changed one detail about the case, could he have changed others? That question would recur throughout my entire investigation. The LAPD had assigned two separate teams of detectives to the cases, one for the Tate murders and one for the LaBiancas. Despite the similarities in their crimes, the LAPD had concluded, as mentioned earlier, that the LaBiancas were the victims of a copycat crime. Geez, do I put it out? Anyway, where was I? Copycat crime. All right, after all, there was seemingly little common ground between the luxe Beverly Hills set at Silo Drive and the suburban couple in Los Feliz. The police fanned out in what would become the largest murder investigation in Los Angeles history. The LaBianca team operated in relative anonymity. The press couldn't muster much interest in the case, at least not when Sharon Tate's killer was on the lam. On the other side of town, by contrast, the Silo crime scene was like a carnival. The LAPD had assigned 21 men to the case. Helicopters hovered over the hilltop property. Guards stood watch around the clock at the entry gate. I guess this is the test. My furnace AC, whatever, just kicked on. And I think that's the buzz that's bothering some folks. Other fascinating thing is the very first mini nuclear reactor had a meltdown, plus that spilled into the ground. This is why they don't pump H2O from the ground in the SFV Burbank area. Yeah. See, well, I lived right next to Battle Mountain, which was just a little hill, but it seemed to be where they buried some stuff. And then Winnemucca was a nuclear test site and dump, or they just dumped it there, buried it. All right. The police fanned out in what would become the largest murder investigation in Los Angeles history. The LaBianca team operated in relative anonymity. Oh, Silo crime scene was on the other side of town. By contrast, the Silo crime scene was like a carnival. The LAPD had assigned 21 men to the case. Helicopters hovered over the hilltop property. Sorry, I already read that. Guards stood watch around the clock at the entry gate. Detectives moved to lock down their initial suspect right away. William Garrison, the lone survivor of the night's massacre, was dragged out of the guest house, sleepy-eyed, shirtless. See, I put a T at the end there. Why? Guadalupe Beach. Yes, Nevada. No AC noise. Awesome. Justin was walking around FIFA wearing these, talking to me just like normal. And I was like, "Where are you?" He's like, "Oh, you can't hear all this banging and clanging and crowd noises and the PA." Anyway, so I was like, "Let me try those. Let's see how this works." But now I know that you can hear my hair when they're draped over the stinking earbuds. We'll see Canyon, super fun site, ruined Semi Valley as well. Guadalupe Beach. All right, looking up Guadalupe Beach later. So he was sleepy eyed, shirtless, barefoot, shoved into a patrol car, and driven straight to headquarters, where he was read his rights and charged with 5 murders. Garrettson, only 19, couldn't explain why he hadn't heard anything that night, except to say it might have been because he had the stereo on. For 3 days, he was on front pages around the world as he languished behind bars. Finally, police concluded he was just a slow kid in the wrong place at the wrong time. In those same first 24 hours, the Tate detectives got a tip. A friend of the victims had been telling people that he knew who the murderers were. Convinced that his knowledge would get him killed, the friend had gone into hiding. He was Witold Kazanowski, an artist and Polish emigree. Somebody typed out phonetically how to say that too. So, who'd known the Tate crowd through his countryman, Wojtek Frykowski. Police tracked him down through Roman Polanski's manager, lured by the promise of 24-hour police protection. Kazanowski finally consented to be interviewed. He believed that Frykowski had been involved in the drug trade with a host of career criminals and other unsavory characters. One of these was a man named Harris Pick Dawson, who had, at a recent party, threatened to kill Frykowski. Remember how Susan Atkins wrote the word pig on the front door of CeeLo Drive in Sharon Tate's blood? Kazanowski thought the word was pick, as in Pick Dawson. Let me see it. No, that's definitely a G. That's a G. But I did just cruise past this. Look at Vince. Look at him. He's like in his heyday. That's his favorite. There's Manson. And there's the crowd on the street. I should have been referencing the images yesterday also. All right, pick Dawson. So the police found him credible, especially because they'd learned about another altercation at the CeeLo house that past spring, when Tate and Polanski had thrown a going-away party. Although the couple had moved in only on February 15th. By the end of March, they had to leave for separate film jobs in Europe, where they'd remain for most of the summer. At their farewell party, attended by more than 100 guests, 3 gate crashers had behaved so aggressively that Polanski had them kicked out. They were Billy Doyle, Tom Harrington, and Pick Dawson. Hoping to ask Polanski about these 3, police anxiously awaited his return from London, scheduled for the evening of August 10th, the day after the bodies had been discovered. Polanski flew back to LA under heavy sedation with his longtime producer, Gene Gutowski, and 2 friends, Warren Beatty and Victor Loans. At the airport, he was spirited through a side exit to a waiting car while Gutowski read a statement to the throngs of press. The chairman of Paramount Pictures had arranged a suite for Polanski on the studio lot, a place where he could avoid the prying eyes of the press and the killers too, if they were to get out, if they were out to get him. But before he arrived at Paramount, Polanski had his car stop at a Denny's parking lot for a hushed conversation with Kazanowski. Bugliosi never reported this in Helter Skelter. The media never knew about it. To me, it was something to explore. After they chatted at Denny's, Kazanowski got in the car and headed to Paramount with the director. They talked all the way to the lot, where the LAPD arrived at the studio that evening. They were barred from entering Polanski's suite until he'd finished the debriefing. Bugliosi didn't find that worth mentioning. He only wrote that Polanski was taken to an apartment inside the Paramount lot, where he remained in seclusion under a doctor's care. The police talked to him briefly that night, but he was, at that time, unable to suggest anyone with a motive for the murders. Polanski's friends, Loans and Gutowski, confirmed the secret Denny's meeting in interviews with me. Both simple exchange of information, defended it as a simple exchange for information between two longtime friends. And yet, Polanski, in a polygraph exam with the LAPD, had denied knowing Kazanowski after all. Sensing there was more to the story, I sought out Kazanowski, who, like so many others connected to the victims, had never spoken to reporters about the murders. Over the phone, somewhat to my surprise, he promptly agreed to discuss the case with me. Yes, he said, the Denny's meeting happened, but despite its seeming urgency, there was nothing so furtive about it. He'd only answered some of Polanski's questions about Frykowski, possible drug dealing, because Kazanowski emphasized that his suspicion that Pick Dawson had targeted Frykowski sent the police on a months-long chase that amounted to nothing. And yet it was easy to see how Frykowski may have gotten in over his head in those months before the murders. It was turbulent times at the Silo house. I learned much more fraught than Bugliosi had reported. Oh, okay. It was a turbulent time, much more fraught than had been reported. I did, through Tahoe, right? Is that where Nevada City is? Somebody asked, if you grew up in Reno, ever go to Nevada City, California? I think there's a pool in a hotel where you can swim across from Nevada to California, and I think it's called Nevada City. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be way off. All right. So it was turbulent. The couple threw parties all the time. The door was open to anyone and everyone. The crowds grew rowdier, the drugs harder, and not just pot and hash, but an ambulance. No, I just irritated myself so bad. But an abundance of cocaine, mescaline, LSD, and MDA, which was then a new and fairly unheard of synthetic. Frykowski was especially enamored of it. Dawson, Doyle, and Harrigan, the same trio who had been booted from the party in mid-March, were now regular guests at the house, sometimes staying for days at a time. They also supplied most of the drugs. By July, the three men, all international smugglers, had cornered the markets on MDA, which was manufactured in Doyle and Harrigan's hometown, Toronto. Frykowski wanted in. Although he didn't have much cash, Folger, his heiress girlfriend, kept him on a tight leash financially. He negotiated a deal with his new friends, making himself a middleman between them and Hollywood. Soon after we spoke on the phone, Kazanowski visited Los Angeles. I met him in the backyard of a friend's home in West Hollywood. A handsome man with a craggy face, thick black hair, and robust blue eyes. He spoke with a heavy accent and a reserved, contemplative air. Though it was maybe 3 in the afternoon, he opened a bottle of red wine and poured us each a generous glass. He'd been the last of Frykowski's friends to see him alive. The two had gotten together in his gallery just hours before the murders. He'd intended to visit the Tate house that night, but he was too tired. Frykowski had called him around midnight, likely just minutes before the killers arrived, to try to talk him into coming over. Now he showed me a large manila envelope full of old ephemera, including Frykowski's airline tickets to the United States, dated May 16th, 1967, and a reference letter Polanski had written for him on Paramount stationery. These artifacts seemed to transport Kazanowski. The 60s, he said, were often on his mind. I can close my eyes and I can feel that it's still 1969. I hear people's voices, I see their faces, Kazanowski said. He was amazed at how the usual indicators of class and status had disappeared in Hollywood at the time. where the most extreme ugliness was a total pure and no, 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 it wasn't was. The most extreme ugliness with total purity was mixed up. This blurriness was the inevitable outcome of the open door policy they'd all subscribed to at the end of the decade. Totally primitive, totally primitive, uneducated people could dress and act like visionary artists, and you couldn't know absolutely who was who. You could have a Manson and you could have a great poet, and it was impossible to make a distinction. Accordingly, Kazanowski remembered so many strange people coming and going from the house on Silo Drive, where he would sometimes stay with Frykowski for days at a stretch. I didn't trust them, he said of the guests. They walked so freely through the place. He would ask Frykowski who these people were, and the answer always came with degrees of removal. They were friends of this guy or friends of friends, and so on. There was that was why after the murders he felt he'd gotten a bead on who the killers were. The same set of drug dealers that Bugliosi mentions passingly in Helter Skelter. I remember Wojtek telling me that they threw Pick Dawson out of a party, he said, taking a sip of wine. They told Pick Dawson to take his backpack and fuck off. Kazanowski remembered another party a few weeks before the murders where he had to kick out two very drunk guys. At the gate, they were standing on the other side looking at Wojtek and me, and they said, "You sons of bitches, we'll be back, and we will kill you." All the months of partying with Frykowski had an accumulative effect. He met so many threatening characters that when his friends turned up dead, he was convinced one or more of them was to blame. He wondered if Frykowski or even Polanski or Sebring had ever encountered Manson or his followers. His concern and uncertainty still felt raw. Here was someone who'd been so close to the victims that he'd held on to their possessions for all these years, and he still couldn't rule out the possibility of revenge motive. As I sat across from him, the elaborate puffery on the Helter Skelter motive and all the panicked headlines that came with it seemed to recede into the afternoon smog. If Frykowski were alive, I ventured, and Kazanowski could ask him one question, what would it be? Looking down into his wine, he said quietly, "Did you ever meet anybody from the group of people who came to kill you?" He who dies with the most toys wins. Having finished what would be her final film, The 13 Chairs, also known as 12 Plus One, Sharon Tate came back to the Silo house in July of 1969. More than 7 months pregnant, she wanted to have her baby in the house she loved. But Polanski, who was supposed to have returned by then, deferred his homecoming. He needed to continue scouting locations for his next film, assuring her that he'd be back in time for the baby's arrival. He asked his old friend Frykowski to stick around with Folger and to keep Tate company. That, at last, is the version Bugliosi provides. Once I'd heard from him about Polanski's tape and the seedier side of Silo, I started pushing harder in my interviews, and diverging stories developed. Polanski's intimates Polanski's intimates said that Tate was grateful for the company. She didn't want to be alone in the secluded estate, especially at the end of her pregnancy. As for Polanski himself, his friends described him as a careful, conservative, even square, and deeply in love with his wife. If he said he had to stay on in London for work, then that's what he was doing. Others remembered it differently. Tate had been horrified at the scene that greeted her upon her return to Los Angeles. She was leery of Folger, and especially of Frykowski, whom she suspected of drug dealing. She wanted the couple and the crowd attached to them out of her house. As I won the confidence of some of her closest friends, they came out with intensely disturbing stories. Her marriage was in shambles, they said, and many of them didn't want her to fix it. They wanted her to leave it. Polanski had established a pattern of abuse, emotional and physical. The Sharon Tate they knew, warm and vivacious, was diminished in his presence. The difference in Sharon was increasable, incredible, y'all. Ooh, I got some diamonds. What was that from you, Allie? I wonder. Allie's probably sleeping. Shh, guys. All right. Oh, and my butt. I need a new stinking chair. That's next on my list. The encoder is going to have to wait. And I feel like if I do get an encoder so I can share like my screen and do all kinds of edits and play clips while streaming, I feel like I'll lose most of my audience. Hookah time. You get it. Is that what you're doing? Ooh, I hope you can't see. I'm going to straighten my sweatpants. I'm always in my jammies now. I could be gussied up during my daytime ones. All right. The difference in Sharon was incredible, said Elke Sommer, the German actress who appeared with her in The Wrecking Crew. She just wasn't herself when she was with him. She was in awe or frightened. He had an awesome charisma. That meant that Polanski could walk all over her, one friend who called him one of the most evil people I ever met, said that he had smashed Tate's face into a mirror, and on another occasion forced her to watch a recording of him having sex with another woman. He cheated on her constantly. He made sure she knew about it. Another friend remembered an incident in which Polanski had asked his wife to wear the same dress that one of his other lovers had worn. When she appeared in her own dress instead, he threw her into the pool in front of their friends. Others said that Polanski hosted orgies at the house without his wife's knowledge or consent. Dominic Dunn, who'd been close to Tate, Polanski, and Jay Sebring, was confident on that point. I never went to their orgies, but I know they existed, and I think Jay was in on it too, he said to me. The director, James Toback, who would himself be disgraced nearly 20 years later by more than 200 allegations of sexual assault, was even more certain. One night, Warren Beatty had invited him to a party at the Tate house. Toback brought him John Brown, a football star who'd become an action film hero. At the party, people began to whisper about an orgy. I was going to be included because I was with Jim, Toback told me, and I was certainly up for it. But Jim declined. And yet, James Toback is full of shit and always has been, Paul Siebert, a production designer and friend of Polanski, told me. Nothing crazy went on up there. There were no orgies, not that I'd ever been to, and I was up there frequently. He conceded that Polanski was peculiar, but whatever his kinkiness was, it was on a small scale and quite private. He might have been hinting at orgies, but there was never any. Orgies or no, at a certain point, Tate felt she'd suffered enough. As the humiliations accumulated, she approached Elke Sommer for her advice. Sommer remembered telling her, I'd take the next heavy object, whether it's an iron or a frying pan or a spade out in the yard, and I'd just brain him. Tate wasn't about to do that, but she did, on a few occasions, warm to the idea of leaving Polanski. Sommer thought she was always too much in her husband's thrall to follow through. There was a tremendous sickness when I worked with Sharon, Sommer said, a horrendous sickness surrounding her relationship. She was quite lost. A number of Tate's friends were quick to mention the undesirable company she kept, with Frykowski and Folger at the top of the list. Tate couldn't stand them, said Joanna Petet, another actress who'd become close to her. The two had lunch together at the house on the day of the murders. Petet was surprised to see Frykowski and Folger, whom she had never met before, walking around like they owned the place. I asked, who are these people? Why are they here? She said, Roman didn't want me to be alone. Tate tolerated the pair only because her husband insisted on it. On the phone with Polanski, so depressed that she fell into tears, she complained that the two had brought too many drugs into the house, too much chaos. but Polanski refused to turn them out. She asked constantly when he'd be home, but he kept postponing his trip, or his return trip. Moreover, she'd try to stay with him in London, and he wouldn't let her. He didn't want her there. I'd gone to great lengths to track down Pitette, who had quite the movie business in the 90s. She lived in the high desert beyond Palm Springs, where she was something of a recluse, with no phone. It had dawned on me I might be able to reach her through the Screen Actors Guild. I'm trying to bend it because I'd like for it to lay flatter. Ooh, which is what helps that spine look like we've been reading. Yeah. All right, so the SAG. They would have her address on file since they were responsible for mailing her residual checks. Through them, I sent her a long letter, and she agreed to meet me for lunch at a strip mall near her house. She was slightly apprehensive when she first arrived. Then 57, she cut a striking figure, dressed head to toe in denim, with large, dark glasses that obscured her piercing eyes until she felt comfortable enough to remove them. I lost it when Sharon was killed, she said. I had to be hospitalized and missed the funeral. She made no attempt to conceal her contempt for Polanski. I hated him, she said flatly. As others had, Pitette described a marriage in which he exuded an almost casual cruelty towards his wife. For 4 months, in the summer of 67, Pitette had stayed with the couple at a rented beach house, and she began to notice how often Polanski bossed Tate around. He had a malicious streak. Sometimes it reached Pitette herself. He would throw a brick in the pool and watch my dog dive for it and try to retrieve it. He stood there laughing. The dog wouldn't give up. After Sharon's funeral, Polanski called Pitette. On the phone, he was strange with me, cold as ice. There was no despair, and I was sobbing. He wanted to know what she'd told the police. It made her wonder what was behind her friend's murder. At the time, I suspected it was maybe friends of his who did it. All I know is he never came when she asked him to come back, and she was here. Figuring that Polanski's confidants would want to tell a different story, I coaxed Bill Tennant, his manager, into talking to me. Tennant had never given an interview about the murders, in part because the events of 69 had sent him, or his life, into a tailspin. He had the somber task of identifying the bodies at the Tate House. A 1993 piece in Vanity by Pete Bart, as coincidence would have it, described Tennant's fall from grace. Through the 60s and 70s, he found great success in Hollywood, discovering the script for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and agenting Peter Fonda's deal for Easy Rider. But Bart had found him a gaunt, battered figure, sleeping in a doorway on Ventura Boulevard. A cocaine addiction had done away with his marriage and his money, leading him to trade even the gold inlays in his teeth for a fix. In Bart's assessment, the shock of the Manson murders began unraveling him. I tracked down Tennant in London, where he was sober, remarried, and managing Michael Flatley, the Lord of the Dance. He'd become a born-again Christian, but he displayed little compassion or forgiveness for Polanski, his one-time client and friend. Roman is a shit, he said, echoing what I've heard from other friends of the couple. I almost said culprit. Tennant said there was two versions of their story. Which one do you want to tell? On one hand, Polanski had fallen into disillusion in London, where he was working on a movie and sleeping around, while back in California, his pregnant wife was putting together a home. Tate wound up getting murdered because he was fucking around in London, he said, but that was just one side of it. The other story is sitting in the Bel Air Hotel with Roman after the funeral and having to address his financial situation, which was not very good, Tennant said, and Roman looking across the table at me and saying, I wish I had spent more. I wish I had bought more dresses. I wish I had given more gifts. So what story do you want to tell? The one about the little prick who left his wife alone with Jay Sebring and Gibby Folger? Folger and Wojtek, these wankers, these four tragic losers. Or do you want to talk about a poor kid, Roman Polanski? Tennant resisted the idea that the murders represented a loss of innocence for Hollywood. There was nothing innocent about it, he said. It was retribution. The big value in Los Angeles, when he was there, Tennant said, was this: he who dies with the most toys wins. I think it's pretty self-serving to call that period and what was going on innocent. What's innocent about drugs? What's innocent about promiscuous sex? You tell me where the innocence was. Within a week of the murders, Polanski was partying it up with Warren Beatty, he added. The brutal reality was that nobody cared or gave a shit about Sharon Tate. Not because they weren't nice, but because she was expendable. As expendable as an actor whose option comes up and gets dropped. After his wife's murder, Polanski stayed on the Paramount Studios lot as much as he could. It was the only place he had left, or had felt safe. I love how my brain just tries to fill in the sentence. Hi, Benjamin. Welcome. In Encino. All right, I'm trying to do this pillow thing on my back, but I feel like I need it under my butt and I need to adjust. So hang tight. The debauchery of the period spread to the whole country. Yes. On purpose, like you were saying. Oh, and I'm higher now. So come up and join me. Okay. How deep are we? Oh, over an hour. Didn't even feel like it. All right, as expendable. All right, after his wife's murder. Yeah. Paramount Studios. It was the only place he felt safe, and not just from the killers or the media, from the LAPD. You found the police surveillance units, and you found that the police in Los Angeles knew everything about everybody, Tennant said. That there was a kind of FBI/CIA aspect of the Los Angeles Police Department, and that they knew everything there was to know. Although he had no way of knowing it in 1969, Tennant wasn't being paranoid when he wondered how the LAPD knew so much about his friends. Many law enforcement agencies, including the LAPD, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI, had maintained units to surveil and even infiltrate groups they had considered subversive or threatening. At this stage, I wasn't inclined to view law enforcement with anything approaching suspicion. Even so, I was beginning to see the official version of the case with a jaundiced eye. In California, everybody has a tan. I found it difficult to sort through the stories coming out of the house on CeeLo Drive. Picture a spider web so dense with connections and tendrils that it looks like a solid sheet of fabric. That's what I felt I was working with. The Hollywood cliques that had seemed at the start so discreet and isolated were all mixed up with one another, more than Bugliosi had made it appear. Plus, then and now, people weren't always willing to be upfront with who they hung out with. Tate was right to be wary of Frykowski, assuming she had been. He'd fallen in with a dangerous crowd. Many of the primitive people that Kazanowski. I keep reading the same name, but there it looked different. So many of the primitive people that Kazanowski met had extensive rap sheets, and their names kept coming up when people mentioned the gravest excesses. Their names kept coming up when people mentioned the gravest excesses of CeeLo Drive. Pick Dawson, who threatened Frykowski's life and been thrown out of Polanski's party, had been the subject of Interpol surveillance for drug smuggling as early as 1965. The young son of a diplomat, he gained entry in the Polanski crowd through his friendship with Cass Elliot, one of the singers in the popular 60s group, the Mamas and the Papas. Like most of the men in the troubled singer's life, he used her for her money and connections. Eliot's biographers would later write that her infamous 1966 London arrest, she'd been caught stealing hotel towels and keys, was actually a ruse to force her to share information about Dawson's drug smuggling operations. Dawson's colleagues in the drug business, Billy Doyle and Tom Harrigan, also wormed their way into Polanski's circle through Mama Cass. According to police reports, Dawson, Doyle, and Harrigan, all 27, and all romantically involved with Eliot, were joined by a fourth partner, Uncle Charles Tecott, a New Yorker who was more than a decade older. A former Marine, the 6'6" strong man was renowned for his prowess with knives. He was rumored to have maintained ties to military intelligence, and he'd been selling drugs in Los Angeles since his arrival in the mid-1950s. Curiously, despite their many years of drug peddling and several drug arrests among them, only Doyle had ever been convicted of any crime, and his conviction was later overturned and changed to an acquittal on his record. Like Manson, the four men seemed to have little fear of law enforcement. Helter Skelter paid only passing attention to these guys. They were among the few figures in the book who were given pseudonyms. Although Bugliosi noted Pick Dawson's death threat against Frykowski, he omitted an even more disturbing incident, one that makes a revenge motive much more plausible, and that reveals the extent to which the victims were mixed up in the seamier side of the counterculture. Seamier. As the story goes, at some point in the months before the murders, the residents of Silo I want to say Silo Drive, but it just says Silo. The residents of Silo threw one of their endless parties, with Frykowski and Sebring leading the charge. Billy Doyle showed up and, in the spirit of the times, drank, smoked, and snorted himself to unconsciousness. Frykowski and Sebring, and maybe Witold, Kazanowski too, wanted to get even with Doyle for something. Some say he sold them bad drugs, so before a crowd of onlookers, they lowered Doyle's pants, flogged him, and anally raped him. This had become the kind of apocrypha that Manson conspiracy theorists can't get enough of. It's the same incident referenced in Barney Hoskins' Waiting for the Sun, the book I showed Bugliosi the day after our lunch. That day after our lunch. The story feels almost mythological in its ugliness and in it. All right, hang on. The story feels almost mythological in its ugliness and in the extent to which its most basic details, who, what, when, where, why, are in flux. Candice Bergen, in an interview with the LAPD a few weeks after the murders, said that it was a rape, most likely at Sebring's place or at a friend John Phillips, also of the Mama and Papas. Dennis Hopper told the Los Angeles Free Press that it was at the Silo house. He described it as a mass whipping of a dealer from Sunset Strip who'd given them bad dope. Ed Sanders, in The Family, reports that Doyle was whipped and video buggered, and the location varies depending on which edition of the book you're looking at. So what really happened? I hesitated to report on this in 1999. It felt like another lurid departure from Manson, and it's not as if my deadline afforded me time to explore every strange byway. But it bothered me that Bugliosi left this out, and that so many people close to the victims regarded it as a flashpoint in the case. It was another instance of the resilience of the live freaky, die freaky mindset. Plus, even if Pick Dawson, Billy Doyle, and the other dealers hadn't murdered anyone, they could still be behind the crimes, or adjacent to them. If I could connect them to Manson, for instance, couldn't they have contracted him for the murders? And if they were selling a lot of drugs to anyone who died at the Tate household, might there have been some kind of cover-up at work? So down I went. Thanks to Kazanowski and a few others who spoke with the LAPD, detectives were quickly suspicious of Doyle and his companions after the murders. And Doyle himself was getting around quite a bit at the time. He was back and forth between Los Angeles and Jamaica, and his native Toronto. It was in this last city that police caught up to him in late August. I wouldn't get a transcript of the LAPD's interview until many years into my investigation. But it's worth including here because it gives his side of the story, and Doyle is quotable. There's something almost farcically hard-boiled. There's something almost farcically hard-boiled about him. In short, he told the LAPD's Lieutenant Earl Deemer that he didn't remember being raped, but he couldn't be sure. It might have happened anyway. He recalled going over to see Frykowski at the Silo house on the night in question. Sometime in early July, Frykowski, thinking it would be a funny prank, slipped some mescaline in his champagne. Folger and Kazanowski was there too. It was out at the swimming pool, Doyle told Deemer, and there were 2 cases of champagne by the pool. And apparently Frykowski put some in my drink. And I said, Jesus, I am high. I am really out of my bird. He wanted something to bring him down, and Frykowski was happy to oblige, producing some pills that he said belonged to Sharon Tate. Doyle swallowed about 8 of them, and soon enough, as Frykowski started to laugh at him, he realized the pills were something else entirely, and that he was dealing with some wild people. They were crazier than hell. I didn't realize they were so crazy. I am using the word crazy. I mean drug-induced crazy. In California, everybody has a tan. Now, if people don't have a tan, they look a little different. You can see things in their face that a tan covers up. They were all tan and looking healthy. They looked very straight to me when I first got there. And I don't remember much more than that. His observation about California, where everybody has a tan, reminded me of Kazanowski's remark. It was impossible back then to separate geniuses from charlatans. Everyone blended in. Of course, by most reckonings, Doyle himself would count as one of the charlatans. He admitted that he was a naturally paranoid person. In recent months, he developed a coke habit, which only exacerbated the paranoia. Convinced that someone somewhere was out to get him, he started carrying a gun. It didn't help that he often bragged about how much cocaine he had, especially when there were women around. They all wanted to get laid, he said to Deemer, and the price of admission was a noseful of coke, and I learned that. He would show up at parties with a silver coke spoon and tell everyone he had pounds of it. His good friend Charles Teacott said, "For Christ's sakes, Billy, why do you tell people that kind of stuff for?" And I said, "I want to get laid, Charles." That day, higher and higher on drugs that he couldn't even name, Doyle became convinced that Frykowski meant to harm him. So he pulled out his gun and pointed it at the pole, threatening to kill him. Frykowski, the bigger man and the more sober, too, if only by a hair, wrestled the gun from him. Here Doyle's memory got hazy. He apparently lapsed into unconsciousness, and Wojtek called up Charlie Teacott asking him to come collect his deranged friend. It was possible, Doyle conceded, that Frykowski or Kazanowski had raped him after that. He admitted that he might have told his friend Mama Cass something to that effect. I was unconscious, he told Deemer. I wasn't sore the next day, not there, but I was sore everywhere else. In another LAPD officer's account of that interview, Doyle puts it even more frankly. I was so freaked out on drugs, I wouldn't know if they'd fucked me or not. It took a lot of asking around, but eventually I tracked down both Billy Doyle and Charles Teacott. As for the other 2, I learned Dawson had died of a drug overdose in 1986, and Harrigan was nowhere to be found. Neither had given an interview before, and though they could be cagey, they were also eager to relive their underworld glories. Both were old men now, but they were still operators who acted as if they were at the height of their criminal powers. Impressively foul-mouthed, both of them threatened to kill me at various points in our interview, although I hadn't taken either seriously. In our first phone call, Teacott filled in some of the blanks from Doyle's story. He remembered driving over to pick up Doyle, who was passed out somewhere on the CeeLo Drive property. His belt had been split, apparently with a knife. A friend who'd come along for the errand said, I think Wojtek fucked him. They took Doyle, still unconscious, to Mama Cass's place in the Hollywood Hills. Teacott remembered thinking, if we don't take care of him, he's going to go back there and have a beef. I carried him out, laid him by a tree, went back to my car, and got about 20 feet of welded link chain, which I had in there for somebody else originally. I put it around his ankle and a tree with a good padlock and snapped it all together. So I know he's not going anywhere. Cass was in the hospital at the time. She said, get the Polaroid, get the Polaroid. Doyle came a few hours later, still very high and simmering with rage. I'm going to shoot that motherfucker, Teacott remembered him saying. And I said, no, no, we're leaving town. We're going to Jamaica. But first you're going to get sober and you're going to be on this fucking tree until you are. I asked Teacott, do you think Wojtek did fuck Billy? Yeah, that's why Billy was so pissed at him, Teacott said. Wojtek would have been killed if I hadn't intervened. Would Billy have hired killers? I asked, thinking of Manson. No, he would have taken all the pleasure himself. In his interview with the police, Doyle had allowed that he was furious at Frykowski and his set. When I was chained to that tree, he said, they were the object of my rage, which was an unreasonable and unnatural rage. To calm him down, Doyle said, Teacott had chained a sign to the tree that said, you are loved. Doyle was stuck there for more than a day. After that, Teacott, am I saying Teacott? It's Teacott, told me the pair headed off to Jamaica, where apparently they were making a movie about marijuana. No footage from this film has ever surfaced. Others have said the two were involved in a large narcotics deal. On August 9th, while they were away, Manson goes up and kills the people, and everyone is looking for Doyle. Teacott said he and Doyle were suspects within days. I picked up the phone one day, and the Toronto Star informed me that me and Billy were in the headlines. 2 wanted for murder. A couple of days later, back in the United States, I took a lie detector test, Teacott told me. They knew I had nothing to do with it. Billy, too. He was in Jamaica with me. We were cleared out of the country. You can't kill somebody long distance. Israel's like, hold my beer. Anyway, true enough, but you can arrange for someone else to do the killing. Teacott adamantly denied that he and Billy Doyle knew Manson. They'd never even met the guy, nor, he said, had they sold drugs to anyone staying at the Tate house. We were consultants, he said. We'd tell them if it was okay or not. If the drugs were okay? Yeah, he added. Billy was fucking a whole bunch of broads up there. Did you ever hear about any orgies? I asked. If you want to consider Billy fucking the broads an orgy. Charlie Teacott wasn't exactly the picture of virtue. I wanted to find other people who'd known him, who could say if they'd known Manson. It wasn't hard. Seemingly everyone in town had partied with Teacott at some point. Corinne Calvet, a French actress who'd worked in Hollywood since the 40s, had one of the most alarming stories of them all. Calvet, was as famous as her turbulent life. Was famous for her turbulent life as her film roles. Okay, so she was as famous for her turbulent life as she was her film roles. She starred opposite James Cagney in What Price Glory. In the 50s, she married Johnny Fontaine, a mobster turned actor who'd been a pallbearer at the gangster Mickey Cohen's funeral. A purported Satanist, she'd been sued in 1967 by a longtime lover who accused her of controlling him with voodoo. I met Calvet at her beach-facing apartment in Santa Monica. Solemn and unsmiling in heavy makeup, her gray hair swept back, she got right to the point. The only thing that I can tell you about this Manson, she said, her accent inflecting the words with glamour and gravity, is that Charlie Taycott brought him and the girls to a party at our house. 2 hours after they were there, I caught Charlie Manson taking a piss in my pool. I told Charlie Teacott to go get them out of here, and they left. After that tragedy happened, the FBI came by and told me I was next on their list to be killed. Oh my, 95. All right, how much? We could finish. We could do this. 2 hours, and we're done. Maybe. She was on the next on their list to be killed. When I expressed shock at this, I want to lean forward. Just went back. I'm gonna lean. Ooh, let me not show you all my cables. That would be. When I expressed shock at this, her eyes narrowed. With genuine malice, she said, "Maybe you are new at this. When I tell you something, don't question it. I don't say it unless it is true." I explained that Taycott had denied ever having met Manson or anyone in the family. "Maybe he has good reason to say that," Calvert said, letting her words hang in the air. She was certain Charlie knew them. I pressed her again. Was she sure that Taycott brought Manson and the girls to her party? Well, I would not put my hand in the fire, saying that Charlie brought them over, but Charlie knew them. I tried to get more out of Calvert, but the rest of the interview was frosty. When I asked her for specific dates or even years, she grew exasperated, throwing her hands up in disgust. "I do not know years. Do not ask me." Before long, she had had it with me altogether. "I want you to leave now," she said, and I did. Thinking I could eventually get Teacott to let his guard down, I began to visit him at the Santa Anita Convalescent Center in Tremple City. His health was failing, and he had trouble walking. I found him lying in bed naked, a sheet pulled just above his groin. He was bald, with a silver mustache, bony arms, and a gravelly voice. I noticed a faded tattoo on his forearm. On the wall, he'd hung a photo of his granddaughter at her senior prom. Later, when he rose to get exercise using a walker, I saw how tall he was, 6'6" and rail thin. Although his faculties were waning, he was sharp. He still commanded enough authority to boss around the short orderly who assisted him. Taycott shared his room with another patient, and he seemed to resent the enfeebling atmosphere of the place. "Too much groaning around here," he said. So I offered to drive him to his favorite restaurant, Coco's, a California chain known for its pies. Taking him out to lunch was an elaborate procedure. People from the rest home wheeling him out to my car, lifting him in, and put the wheelchair in my trunk. Once we were at Coco's, however, I had to lift Taycott into the wheelchair myself, an intimate maneuver for two near strangers. Humiliated, he began to threaten me, albeit ineffectually. "Do you realize who you're dealing with?" he rasped as I attempted to hoist him out of my passenger seat. "I could have you hurt or killed." In Coco's, with food in front of him, he calmed down a bit. Soon we were having a freewheeling, if combative conversation about the murders in Hollywood in the 60s. Taycott had lived in Los Angeles since the mid-50s, when he moved there from Mexico with his wife. He had two daughters, one of whom, Margot, would later confirm a lot of her father's story. He was a drug dealer, she said, who operated in the fringes of the music and acting world. Although he would often get arrested, she said, nothing ever stuck. Someone always took care of it for him. Taycott continued to deny ever having known Manson, and he bridled at the insinuation that he had anything to do with the crimes. "The Tate murders," he went on, "led to the most fucked up investigation I've ever seen in my life." He had sued the Los Angeles Times for announcing him as a suspect. Any effort to implicate him, he said, was probably just the LAPD covering up for their bad police work. As he grew more comfortable, Taycott made an unexpected revelation. At the time of the murders, he worked for the intelligence agency. He wouldn't say which. He worked for an intelligence agency and wouldn't say which. and reported to Hank Fine, a veteran of the Army's Military Intelligence Service. This had been a World War II era operation, so secret that it wasn't even acknowledged by the federal government until 1972. Fine, a Polish emigre, whose true name was Hirsch Matthias Warzenkehi, was an assassin who shot people for the government, Takeot claimed. Thinking the old guy was fantasizing, I barely followed up on the revelation, but he and later Billy Doyle would often reference Fine, only to refuse to answer any questions about him. When I looked into him, I learned neither man had been lying. Takeot also described his friend Doyle, they were still close, as a dangerous man. He'd kill you in a fucking minute. Both of us are second-generation intelligence. Don't write this stuff, he implored me. You'll get killed. There are very dangerous men, and they will find you and kill you. That was a warning I'd hear a lot from various parties over the years. Takeot reminded me that Bugliosi, when he wrote Helter Skelter, had given pseudonyms to him and his friends, and not just for the sake of politeness. He was afraid American intelligence would kill him if he exposed us, Takeot claimed. He added that Bugliosi was an asshole who'd never interviewed him or Billy. Vincent Bugliosi knows to keep his mouth shut. I'd have gotten him killed. I didn't tell him that, didn't have to. I tried to get Takeot on the subject of Frykowski, who was, to my mind, the victim with the shadiest cast of characters around him. Frykowski was on drugs all the time, Takeot said, contradicting what he had told me on the phone. He said that Frykowski had sold MDA, but only to close friends. I didn't take Takeot out again, but I kept calling and visiting him. I found him evasive or senile or a little of both. And the more I asked around about him, the more he seemed to vanish into the mist of the 60s. Some people told me with certainty that Takeot had been an assassin for the CIA, that he was a gun freak, an incredible marksman. In his 2006 autobiography, Since Then, How I Survived Everything and Lived to Tell About It, the musician David Crosby identified Takeot as a soldier of fortune who taught him how to shoot a gun. Others said that he was an ex-Marine who served in Korea and used to show off his impressive knife-throwing skills. I heard that he grew pot in Arizona, and that he was a child molester, that he was a coke smuggler, that he was an uncredited screenwriter, and that his intelligence ties were all fictitious. And the strange thing was, none of this was entirely implausible. About the only thing everyone could agree on was that Takeot had been involved in a lot of schemes, that he'd been a drug dealer, and even more a drug user. But then, as one source put it, hey man, aren't you? When I looked into Hank Fine, the MIS guy Takeot said he reported to, I learned that, like everything Takeot said, there was at least a kernel of truth to it. Fine, who'd been a movie PR man from the 1940s until his death in 1975, had been in the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the counterintelligence agency that oversaw the MIS and evolved into the CIA after World War II. His work often seemed to combine Hollywood and spycraft. Eddie Albert, the star of the 60s sitcom Green Acres, told me that Fine had set him on undercover missions to Mexico during the war. From his sailboat, the actor had photographed German landing sites and military training grounds. Though I found no proof, the consensus among Fine's associates was that he continued working espionage operations through the 60s. His only child, Shayla, told me that his public relations gig was a cover, and yes, she said, and when I said yeah, Takeot had reported to her father. What kind of work were they doing? She never knew, except that it was classified. Whenever I saw Takeot, I returned to the subject of Fine. Don't mention that name anywhere, he barked, seemingly genuinely disturbed. When I asked why not, he said, none of your fucking business. You're fucking with the wrong people. Or was I fucking with lowlifes who only wanted to present an illusion of importance? I really couldn't say. And when I finally was able to talk to Billy Doyle, it's back. It's got a friend. Things didn't get any clearer. When I was finally able to talk to Billy Doyle, things didn't get any clearer. Taycott gave me Doyle's number. He's a retired old man just like me, he said, and he may not want to talk so much. Don't push him if he doesn't. But Doyle liked an audience, just as he had in 1969. I called him often at his home in Toronto, and he talked for hours, sometimes rambling at such length that I would turn off my recorder to save tape. Just when he was trying my patience, he'd said something provocative, and I'd have to switch the recorder back on and try to get him to repeat it. He had a short temper, and when he exploded, usually out of nowhere, it could be hard to calm him down. One time, when he didn't get my line of questioning, he told me I was shooting targets at 1,000 yards yesterday, implying that I could soon be one of them. Another time, when I tried to get some specifics about Hank Fine, Doyle yelled, "Go in the bathroom, swallow the gun, and pull the trigger." When he wasn't angry, he sometimes got a kick out of teasing me. He would make a major revelation and then retract it the next time we spoke. I got the sense that he sometimes trusted me enough to tell the truth, only to realize later that he shouldn't have done that. Doyle believed that Polanski and Frykowski were Polish spies, the former subverting American democracy with his decadent films. He was sure that Polanski had something to do with the killings. It went both ways. I'd heard that Polanski thought Doyle had something to do with the killings. He denied that he'd ever been a drug dealer. I read in passages from the police report in which he confessed to, even bragged about having vast amounts of cocaine. But even after that, he denied it to me. He wouldn't be stupid enough to carry 2 pounds of coke on a plane, he said. When I asked him about MDA, the drug that he and Wojtek had allegedly brought in large quantities, he said he'd never even heard of it. He relented when I read him some quotes from the transcript. Okay, fine, he'd taken it. I brought up his and Taycott's alibi for the night of the murders. They'd been in Jamaica. You'll recall filming a pop movie. Doyle admitted that the movie was a ruse. He and Taycott had really been doing intelligence work there, he said, as part of some effort to keep Cuba out of Jamaica. Dead white men will pull your tongue out of you and tell you this. No, dead white men will pull your tongue out if you tell this shit. Oh, my brains. You have to understand that the government doesn't want any exposure on the Jamaica thing. There never was a Jamaican thing. They don't want to know about it. When I asked why, he said, "How the fuck do I know? I'm a Canadian citizen. I went with Charles on an adventure. I thought we were going to do a movie. But that's not what you were really there for, and you knew it." That's right. It's an exchange that illustrates how cryptic Doyle could be and how he reveled in it. I had to ask about the story behind his alleged rape. He said that never happened either. Charles was spreading the rape story to have fun at my expense, he explained. Even my mom and dad asked if I was raped. And yet he betrayed the same uncertainty he had shown to the cops so many years ago, telling me that he had a friend take photos of him naked so he could examine his rear end. Similarly, he told me that Corinne Calvet was dead wrong when she said that Taycott had brought Manson to her house. That's a lie, he said, noting that Taycott and Calvet had once dated. She will say anything to grasp at stardom. Men with badges and guns have raised these questions before, he added. Not police, FBI, sitting in D.C. That in itself was astonishing to me. I hadn't heard that the FBI had investigated the murders, but I would find out later that it was true. I suggested that I didn't believe him about Calvet. You're going to come to a horrible truth, he said. Be nervous that you may have discovered the truth and you won't like it. As spurious and slimy as he could be, I found him believable, and when he repeated that there was more to the murders than had been reported, later, when I had interviewed so many people that some of them had started to compare notes, he said something really impenetrable. The community has looked at this as a settled thing until you started talking to us. What community? I asked. Who? The ties that bind. Eventually, Doyle became convinced that I was Roman Polanski's private investigator. It was never clear to me how much he actually believed this, but it was enough to make me back away from him. I sunk a lot of hours into cultivating sources like Taycott, Doyle, and the crowd surrounding them. They'd been so close to the Tate murders that they were suspects, and yet they'd assumed no role in the mythology surrounding the events on August 9th. Bugliosi, like the LAPD, had summarily acquitted them of any involvement in the killings. They were his book's classic red herring, but I still wasn't convinced. In their sleazy, run-of-the-mill criminality, their motivations seemed much more viable than a lofty idea like Helter Skelter. The more I talked to them, the more I recognized certain inadequacies in Bugliosi's story, which had curtailed so many explanations in favor of the most outlandish ones. I'm going to stop there. Let me see, actually. One, two. I'll keep going. I'll keep going. Candace Bergman was the spokesman for the Norton A&S Simone Museum. She reeks of monarch programming, HR, bumping stuff. And then there's a address. She probably did use voodoo. Yeah. Coco, your mom loved that place? Only 5 Cocos remain. What did they say they went there for? Oh, for the pies. It said MIS, which is weird to me. It stuck out to me also. Let me find it. When there was, he said OSS and then MI, yeah, oversaw the MIS right there and evolved into the CIA after World War II. That stuck out to me too. So, a haircut from Little Joe. I wanted to keep one eye open to the possibility that Taycott, Doyle, and their associates had some link to the Manson group. After all, in The Family, Ed Sanders had written that it was likely that Mama Cass Elliott knew Manson through her drug connections. It seemed probable that Doyle and Taycott were pivotal there. Plus, Elliott had been friends with Frykowski and Folger, and Elliott's bandmates were close to Polanski and Tate. In other words, everyone knew everyone else, and nobody wanted to talk about it anymore. Maybe I could suss out the connections there, but I was less enthusiastic about these supposed ties with intelligence agencies, except that I was about to get another push in that direction. Dominic Dunn, the Vanity Fair journalist who'd been friends with Tate, Polanski, and Jay Sebrings, had given me a tip. Get a haircut from a man named Joe Torrenueva, nicknamed Little Joe. Torrenueva had been 18, fresh out of barber school, when Jay Sebring took him under his wing as an apprentice hairstylist. That was in 1961. Sebring, not yet 30, was already one of the bigger names in fashion, having revolutionized men's grooming. He was the first to style men's hair rather than simply cut it. He patented a Sebring method through which your hair is shaped and conditioned to stay natural in between visits, as promotional materials explained, and he introduced a line of hair care products. Sebring wasn't his given name. He was born Thomas Cummer, and renamed himself after a racetrack in Florida he liked. Sebring saw his clients in a private room with only one chair. When Torrenueva began working for him, he was charging an unheard of $25 for a haircut. The going rate was $1.50, but his customers were happy to pay a premium, and in turn, he catered to their whims. Sebring traveled every few weeks to Las Vegas, where his clients included Frank Sinatra and several casino owners. Torrenueva always went with him, and in those quiet rooms, as the scissors snipped and tufts of hair gathered on the floor, he saw the casual intimacy between Sebring and his clients, who confided in him every little Oh, even when little Joe was within earshot. Now, like his mentor, to whom he referred in hushed, almost reverential tones, little Joe was a barber to the stars. He saw his clients in private, oak-paneled room in Beverly Hills. His price was $100. Dunn had told me that if I bided my time and didn't press him too hard, Joe might open up about the murders. When I showed up, he seemed aware of my ulterior motives. Slight and soft-spoken, he sighed and paused before nearly every sentence. Joe was convinced that Sebring's murder had to do with something more than hippies trying to ignite a race war. Sebring, he told me, had been involved with mob guys from Chicago and Las Vegas. He cut their hair, partied with them in Vegas. Then, after the murders, little Joe got a call from General Charlie Barron, a casino executive and mobster, who told him, "Don't worry, little Joe, you're going to be all right." Almost like Victor Marx telling Erica they only wanted to kill Charlie. Oop, I'm offset. $25 in 1966 is $258.58 in current dollars. Interesting. Hi, Ricky. Oh, good to see you. I wonder how long ago that popped up. The chat's moving slow. I think it's because everybody's interested in the book. All right. He was very close to. No, 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 no. Yeah, he presumed that the murders had been a drug deal gone wrong and that Jay and Frykowski had been targeted. There's a lot of similarities, and that's why we're reading this book. So, welcome, Mike. Nice name, by the way. So, and this is the key, friend, the CIA. Abby, good to see you're still up with me. So, and I just mentioned that when he told him, the mobster called him and told him, "Don't worry, little Joe, you're going to be all right." It reminded me of Victor Marx calling Erica and saying, "Don't worry, they don't want you. They only wanted Charlie." It's similar, the same kind of care was put into these events. Even JFK, the Charlie murder, the Manson murders, the Charlie Kirk situation. It all ties in, and it feels like the common thread is the CIA. Yeah, that would make sense. I read that book, No One Here Gets Out Alive, and I thought it was reductive a little. But I read it ages ago. I haven't read it since. I only read it the one time. Um, but that checks out. Interesting. Oh, it's not really clear. Maybe there's some typos, but seriously, Jim Morrison's father was a rear admiral and intelligence, and they claimed that Jim had some ties to the CIA. Cocaine's invisible army. Mm-hmm. CIA. All right. I want to get through this. 2 more pages. So that was all I got. I needed more information. I'd have to get another haircut. I let a month go by, so I really needed one. And soon enough, I settled into little Joe's leather chair again. Excuse me. Charlie Barron's call haunted him to this day. It came right after the murders, Tora Nueva said, before anyone had any notion of who'd committed them. "You don't do anything to anybody," he said. Barron told him. "Nobody's going to do anything to you." The implication was that the Baron and his associates were well aware of who committed the crimes and why. Kind of like Victor Marx. I assume, allegedly. But then Joe was done snipping, so I went back for a third haircut. Charlie Barron was very close to Joe told me in our third conversation. He added, Charlie killed people. When Barron was a young man during Prohibition in Chicago, he shot two guys who were going to kill him for fixing a fight. He later went to Havana to run casinos for Mayor Langsky. Langsky, yeah, another mob figure. When he returned to the United States, he was Lansky's eyes and ears at the New Sands Casino in Vegas. Barron was hardly an outlier in Sebring's shop, which was a nest of mobsters and criminals, Torrenueva said. But it was Barron who scared little Joe the most. I wonder if I'm out of it. We are reading Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. We're in chapter 2. We're almost done with chapter 2. I've got a playlist if you'd like to start at the beginning. Dennis had been to Dennis's place. Manson had been to Dennis's place. Dennis Hopper in Topanga Canyon already. Anyway, Barron was hardly an outlier, okay, but it was Barron who scared little Joe the most even before his phone call. Despite Barron's known mob ties, he had some type of security intelligence clearance with the federal government. He always packed a gun, and he was close with a cabal of right-wing military intelligence and Hollywood figures, many of whom had been Sebring's clients. Little Joe alleged that they did terrible things to black people, and that it was Charlie who were the worst things. I couldn't get him to elaborate on that, but I did ask him why, and if he was following the Tate murder investigation and knew that the police had no leads. He didn't tell the cops about his call from Barron because he was too close to higher ups in law enforcement and intelligence, Joe said. He added yet another intriguing name to the list of Barron's associates, General Curtis E. LeMay, a legendary fighter pilot who implemented the carpet bombing of Japan during World War II. A notorious hawk, LeMay had served as chief of staff. Is LeMay somebody from the Devil's Chessboard? See, my ADHD would have had me digging in another book. Again, you guys are keeping me honest. So, LeMay had served as chief of staff in the U.S. Air Force under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. Okay, he was in that book. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he'd tried to organize a coup against Kennedy among the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He wanted to force the military to flout the president's orders and bomb the Soviet missile bases they'd found in Cuba. Yes, bombs away LeMay. Noah Manson sent the family to what he thought was Dennis Wilson. Oh, yes. Wilson lived there before Sharon did, and that's who they were looking for. Yes, he comes up later. Anyway, it was a lot of names to process, and the implications were dizzying. I had one question that Terra Nueva was especially reluctant to answer. Why would Sebring, at the time arguably the best known men's hairstylist in the world, involve himself in crime? He had so much to lose, and clearly he was thriving. But he hadn't been. Terra Nueva was pained to say. The deals kept falling through. He was a bad businessman. Do you think he sold drugs? I asked, aware that Frykowski had possibly been doing the same. It wouldn't surprise me. Sebring's problems had multiplied through the 60s. He'd clashed with other barbers who wanted to unionize. In 1963, a group of his stylists had defected en masse to start their own business. At other times, he had to hire bodyguards because some guys had come into the shop and roughed up several employees. Torre Nueva said for reasons that were never shared with him. Sebring carried a gun, and he shot someone once who came into his house and was giving his father a rough time at the door. Okay, the bottom line, Sebring, like Frykowski, had a lot more going on at the time of his murder than had ever been revealed. Whatever it was, little Joe thought it had more to do with his death than any hippie race war motive did. which meant that in addition to drug dealers and Hollywood's seedier hangers on, I had to account for mobsters, ex-military figures, and intelligence agents in my reporting. I was already worried about wandering into the weeds, and now I risked veering off the map entirely. Coda, down the rabbit hole. I was writing a story about Charles Manson that had, so far, very little of Manson in it. It was more about the way that events, in all their messy reality, boiled down to canonical fact. Canonical canonical fact, the way that a narrative becomes the narrative. I had to decide if stories like Little Joe's, Charlie Taycott's, and Billy Doyle's were worth looking into, and as a responsible journalist, if I was justified in dragging my magazine into it. It definitely meant asking for an extension from Premiere and risking, in the final publication, looking like a fool. No matter how you viewed them, these were conspiracy theories. But I was riveted by the stuff I'd turned up that contravened the Manson story as we knew it. For better or for worse, it felt like there was something covered up in all these years, ripe for exposure. Maybe with the passage of time, people who knew about the things might divulge them at last. I was starting to figure out that Bugliosi had sifted so many stories out of Helter Skelter to make his narrative about the conviction of the mad hippie guru and his zombie-like followers easier and cleaner. If that were merely an editorial choice, so be it. But if he'd changed things to protect people or to shore up holes in the investigation, then I felt justified in digging deeper. It seemed impossible that a story like Little Joe's, heavy with intelligence agencies and organized crime, could coexist alongside the Helter Skelter motive. I knew that in the late 60s, intelligence agencies regarded dissident youth movements as the greatest threat to the nation's security, and they'd marshaled their efforts accordingly. Insofar as hippies, musicians, and movie stars played a role in those movements, I could see how the broadest outline of Little Joe's story could have some truth to it. But even a hardened national security reporter would have trouble verifying his claims, and that I was not. These were the concerns I faced by the summer of 1999. The obvious answer would be keep pushing. The only problem was my deadline was fast approaching, and I owed Premiere 5,000 words, and I'd written zero. Amazing. Tomorrow, tomorrow, we will do chapter 3. There we go. We did it. Dude, if we do this chapter at a time, we might kill this book in no time. All right, y'all. Who's here with me still? Dennis comes later in the book. It's not that the CIA wanted Tate and her guests murdered. It's about the mind games the CIA plays with people and the fallout. Weaponized fear, for starters. Yes. Charlie sent the family in thinking that Dennis Wilson still lived. Oh, yeah, I see why you brought up Dennis now. Dr. Strangelove is about Leamy. Y'all, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for enjoying books. I love them. I love reading. I'm so glad that you're here to listen with me so we can talk about why these things are relevant now. Like, that's probably my favorite question. What does this have to do with Charlie Kirk? How can I draw any comparisons? I feel like if we're able to recognize the patterns that have echoed through history, we'll be able to see much more clearly what's happening now. And I think the powers that be are betting on us being stupid. They want us, thank you, Abby. Oh, thank you, Ricky. Look at you, sending love. I'm glad you're still here. Yes. Anyway, I was saying they want us to not notice the patterns. That's why they want people to think Candace is crazy. And the way they're scrambling right now, it is just so icky. Like Tim Pool and Larry Loomer. Just seeing their posts, how does anybody take them seriously? And the only people who are buying this coming from Andrew Colvett. Um, oh, ha ha ha! She's talking about what was his latest post? I was like, what, dude? Um, he was talking clearly about the video. Oh yeah, and Gary Meltdown from Paramount Tactical was like, "Where's the other 7 minutes where he assembled the weapon?" He assembled the weapon. I mean, the video she showed has him getting on the roof, laying down after sideways crawling, and then getting up and leaving with no recoil, with no flash, muzzle flash, and no line of sight. And he was like, well, it's because she left out the part where he did that. It's like, oh, so he got on the roof twice, is what you're saying? Right. I know they should have never given us the internet. Somebody said their boat is sinking. That's not even the correct building. Yep. Yeah. And it's so gross to see. And it's like you want us to be stupid, but we're not. And you're making fun of yourself. It just feels it's embarrassing to watch these people. Valhalla? Or you mean BFT? Yeah. Yeah, that's why it's on my mind. I watched him earlier breaking down the video. And they're like, "Oh, babies also crawl laterally." Right. But it is a trained military maneuver. So is walking on your, you know what I mean? Your, what is that called? Your prone. What do they call it when you lay down and crawl? The murder is the murder is the dude that was on the roof. He didn't break the gun down. It was in one piece. That's why he's limping there. It's listen, the guy who's limping forgot which leg to limp with while he was limping. There's video, one solid video where he's limping with the right and then with the left and then with the right again. And the guy on the roof is in clear tactical gear, if not a large overcoat. And the guy on the stairs with his tiny little backpack couldn't have fit a large overcoat, a 44-inch gun assembled or disassembled. How is he going to hop on that roof with an assembled gun in his pants? You know, the things don't fit. They can't explain the screwdriver. You can't take the shot from that roof, right? They showed us the video and we could verify that there wasn't an angle that he could have taken a shot. When he jumped off the roof and he's cuddling away, you could see him limping. Nope, he's in a full-blown run. The guy had to use the screwdriver to put on the scope. You can't just put on a scope. You have to, yeah, you have to zero it in. You have to dial it down. Listen, you can't even acquiesce to the thought that a 30-06 put a tiny hole in his neck and didn't blow his head off, or certainly out the back and through concrete behind him, because it would have. It would have gone through concrete behind him. And we can agree to disagree, Mike. You can be here and we can I don't recommend echo chambers for anybody. But that's something, I mean, I've been shooting since I was 4 years old. I know how guns work. I know how bullets work. And you can say, oh, it was a special bullet. Not all bullets act the same. That wasn't a 30-06. That was a shape charge. And they tested the technology in Lebanon because they find those people to be expendable. And then they put it on Charlie's chest, hoping it would look like a chest wound with a white T-shirt to traumatize anybody watching. And it didn't go as they planned. And they've been scrambling ever since. So how did he disassemble the gun and then put it back together if he left the stinking screwdriver on the roof? The barrel of the gun was dusty. Well, he could have put it down the other pant leg. We all know as he heard one of the pant leg, and then if he put down the other leg and he jumped off and didn't break the firearm down and reassemble it. But they said he did. They said it was a 30-06, and that's what you use to take down a moose. And it was a soft tipped bullet, they say, which increases the diameter of the wound. So it would have taken his head off. That in and of itself provides a pretty sturdy shadow of doubt. Period. And in America, you are innocent until proven guilty, beyond a shadow of doubt. Guys have tried to put a weapon that big in pants and it can't be done. They're the same guy who go back and review the video again. I mean, I wish you were right, but you're wrong. And I understand. I understand the sentiment, friend. And we probably won't get anywhere together on that subject matter, but if you'd like to stick around and come join me tomorrow, we'll start chapter 3 of Chaos. The Charles Manson CIA and 60s, the secret history of the 60s. And here's the thing you can't get past. You got 5 different agencies and another 3. How do you get that many people to keep a fucking secret? That's the same tired excuse they gave the JFK thing, and it turns out that was a conspiracy. And people do talk and they get smeared. People get close to the answers and they're told that no other people around them are told that that person is crazy or a delinquent or degenerate, not delinquent unless they're a kid. Have you Kybalion? What's that? No. Mike, if you can go to our community section, I posted a picture of the stairway guy versus Tyler. Yep. I took the screenshot before the FBI had a chance to pixelate it because they did that. He had begun simple in his down on the side of his leg. There was no angle, even if, I mean, the video shows that the person laying on the roof had no clear line of sight to Charlie. You know? And that it was a 30-06 with a soft tip bullet. It wasn't what killed him. His head would be gone. And you've got a lot of coulda beens. But if you were a detective, you'd be fired with that thought process, my friend. You are trying to explain back from a or like you're trying to, what do you say? Like you're supposed to start with a hypothesis and then experiment to find out if it's correct or not. You're at the conclusion trying to work backwards, which isn't how it works. No, you can't. You can't. It's angles, friend. You cannot see the courtyard, the specific spot where Charlie was sitting from that roof. And we all saw that. Same thing with the book depository. There was no shot. And he went back and to the left. And like that didn't come out into public consciousness until Oliver Stone's movie. We just read The Devil's Chessboard. I implore you to watch that if you're interested. This was a doozy also. Still, some of it was hoping to steer the narrative away from deeper secrets, but it reveals a lot. The building was obstructing the shot. I wonder how long you've been on YouTube. I don't know. I don't want to keep arguing though. It's been an hour. It's been 2 hours and like 18 minutes. And it's 2:17 in the morning. I appreciate you engaging in conversation. I do feel like that I've been a little exasperated in no, I was just giving perspective, Warren. I'm good. How are you? He wasn't on the edge of the roof. How does he get the 19-degree angle? He can't. And that's the wrong building. And it's the wrong building. Yes, sorry. I will read typos. I'm like Ron Burgundy. Anyway, love you guys. Thanks for being here with me. Join me tomorrow. And we'll see on the replay if these work because I'm so sick of audio issues. I'm hoping this cuts out the background noise like my furnace and everything. All right. All right, Mike. Thanks for talking about it. Thanks for chatting. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye. Midnight tomorrow, which is the next day anyway, technically. Technicalities. Bye bye, Ricky. I'm so glad to see you. Bye, Abby. Bye, Rod. Bye, Benjamin, if you're still here. You haven't seen the actual autopsy. I don't think there was one, but that's just my opinion. That's my opinion. They said there was, but it seems to me more plausible that they just skipped the hospital visit since they can't get security footage um, and they went straight for cremation. But I could be totally wrong and off base. It would have blown out his spine, dude. It would have blown out concrete behind him. It was another magic bullet. I get it. All right. I'll see y'all later.